play one more. It's been a real pleasure to hear everybody play tonight, and thanks to Thomas and everybody here at Meidzeit, and it's great to be back. It's been several years, so the first time I taught here was in 2009, I think. So it's one of those things where, you know, it's interesting. I've been doing the same thing for a living for 35 years now, and in my mind, I'm the same guy, basically. Nothing much has changed, you know, on the inside. And so it kind of feels like time stands still most of the time when I get up on stage, and it could be 1992, or it could be 1988, or it could be 2001, or whatever. And to think that that was 16 years ago blows my mind, but it seems impossible. But anyway, it's one of these eternal places. So thanks for having me back, Thomas. And thanks for being such a fine group of folks. Figured I better play this tune. So Randy's videoing this, I better tell the story. So I first got to meet Michael Hedges. What happened was he did one of these shows, like Windham Hill Records was doing these shows, an evening with Windham Hill kind of thing, because the label was already gaining a lot of traction sort of as a brand. I discovered the label one day in 1985. I just happened to, I had a summer job that year. And I happened to go into like a suburban record store, like the most unlikely place. And I just thought, I got a few bucks in my pocket, I'll buy a record. And I walked in, and over in the corner was this display of what I thought were ECM recordings. So of course ECM, very famous German label, with these very minimalist, artsy album covers. So I thought, I got an ECM thing going on. I walked over and went, no, those aren't ECM artists. I don't recognize any of them. And so then they had all these albums and cassettes piled up, and I saw solo piano, solo guitar. Who's Alex DeGrassi? Never heard of him. Liz Story, Michael Hedge, I don't know. It kept going, you know, and then I realized, okay, I thought I'll buy one of these samplers that they have. So I bought a sampler cassette, and I threw it in my Walkman, and I took the bus home from my summer job, and the first tune on the cassette was Aerial Boundaries. And I heard it, and I thought, okay, that's like 20 people playing at once. Okay, I think there's a couple of African drummers. There's about 3 guitar players. There's a bass player, and then the more I listened to it, I thought, no, that's 2 guitarists. Okay, I got it now. It's 2 guitar. No, it's 1 guitar. I think that's possible to play on 1 guitar, but it seems absolutely ridiculous. This person is from another planet. So I had the cassette for a little while, and I went home to my parents' place, and I said, listen to this, because they really liked what I did on the guitar. I said, I think that's 1 person playing. And they went, no, impossible. So I took the cassette, and I very religiously played a few notes, and I figured out, you know, doing this, then the ostinato pattern, figuring out, and I eventually learned the whole tune. It took a weekend, but I figured out the tune. And then I thought, okay. Now, I'm sorry, I thought that was a long time. I thought you'd go, really? It took you that long? Anyway, so I thought, okay, well, that's a really cool tune. So I'll go out and buy another Michael Hedges record. So I bought, I guess it was the Aerial Boundaries album. And I learned Rickover's Dream off the album. And of course, I never play these tunes live because he did them so well. What's the point, you know? It's like covering the Beatles. Why, you know? So anyway, point being that a few years later, in 1986, there was an evening with Windham Hill concert in Toronto where I was living at the time. And it was at Roy Thompson Hall, which is the big symphony room, you know? So I thought, wow, they're really going for it, these guys. And so I saw, wow, Michael Hedges is going to be there. Crazy, that's amazing. So I went to the show, and I had made a little cassette album. My late wife, Kelly, I met her through music. She and I made this thing where it was an album-length demo, this cassette. And I did everything I ever did on it. I played piano, I played fretless bass, I played banjo, I played guitar, I played everything. And Kelly and I sang some duets, and I played fretless bass, and I played synthesizers, and I was trying to get work in Toronto as a session musician. So I thought this is the way to do it. So I was dropping this thing off to everyone. So I went to Michael's show, and so Michael was the first act on, and then there was a band called Shadowfax playing. And I thought, no, yeah, they're okay. But Michael was mind-boggling, and he played his harp guitar, and it was really, really cool. Anyway, so I gave a cassette to the front of house sound guy. I said, would you mind giving this to Michael? And he said, yeah, I'll make sure he gets it. And I thought, yeah, right, sure you will. But whatever. Yeah. And then 6 months went by. Okay, well, he never got it. And then I get this phone call out of the blue. And, hi, you don't know me. My name's Martin Posen. Are you a friend of Michael Hedges? And I said, no, I wish I was, but I'm not. And he says, well, I am. He says, Michael and I went to music camp together in Michigan when we were both 17. And he called me up, and he said that you and I should meet. And I said, is this because of the cassette I gave his son? He said, yeah. He really liked it. And he said, you and I should get together and play some music. Sure, come on over. So he came over, we had some tea, and we played some music. It was very nice. And then a few months later, Michael came back for a solo show. And he played at the Bathurst Street Theatre in Toronto. It was like a 500-seat room, and he filled it. And I thought, wow, he's well known already. And then, so Martin said, well, let's go backstage and I'll introduce you. And I went, great. So there was about 20 people ahead of us in the line, all getting, their foreheads signed or whatever. And then, but Michael was talking to these people, and he kept looking over at me and Martin. And then finally, he just said, excuse me a sec, to the person and he walks over to me. He goes, are you Don? And I said, yes. And he goes, you wrote that tune. I said, yeah, the first ride. He says, that's a fucking great tune. Oh my God, that was on that cassette you gave me. I love that tune. I was like, thank you. And then these 20 people ahead of me are all looking at me like, who the hell is he? Right? And then every time Michael came to town, we'd get together and we'd just shoot the shit. We didn't play music. We just would fetch backstage and stuff. And then finally, I had this tune that I was working on. And Michael said, one day we should record a tune together. And I said, sure, why not? So I was working on this tune, and I sent it to him in California. And then I finally, I found him. Eventually, I found out he was on the road. He was at John Strope's place. John Strope's is this guy who does transcriptions of like Alex Degrassi and Michael Hedges. And he did a lovely set of Michael Hedges transcriptions, very accurate, based on videos he took of Michael playing them. And so I called John's place, and I got in touch with Michael. And he said, oh man, that tune you sent me on the cassette is so hot. He says, but I have no idea what I would play on it. It was a tune called Afraid to Dance. Very funky tune. And it's true, it was a pretty busy tune. And I thought, okay, well, he's got a point. And he says, yeah, write another one and leave it a little space and we'll do it. And I said, great. So I wrote another tune in 1997. And I finished it in November. And I was all excited. And then I was going to send it to him. And then I was in Berlin when I wrote the tune. I wrote the tune in Berlin. And I took the plane to BC, to British Columbia, Western Canada, to start a tour. And I was in Nanaimo, British Columbia. And back then I used to have to check my email at internet cafes. So I went to the internet cafe, checked my email. A student writes to me and says, sorry to hear about Michael Hedges. And I went, sorry to hear about him? Why is he sorry? That's all he said. And so I called my late wife, Kelly, just got the machine. I said, did something happen to Michael? And then a few hours later, I tried again. And she said, yeah, I talked to our friend Cindy, who worked at a record label. She says, yeah, Michael died in a car accident. And I'm like, what the? So I was so upset, for many reasons, to do with the fact that he was my friend. And then I wrote this tune we were supposed to play together. And I thought, what the hell, this is terrible. And I was walking around Nanaimo, British Columbia, just muttering his name over and over again. Michael, I can't fucking believe it. Michael. Oh, I'll finish the tune, I'll dedicate it to him, and I'll call it Michael. So that's what this is. Let's do a duet. Here we go. Go like that. Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks, you guys. Just letting you know, thank you so much. Just letting you know, I do have stuff. So I've got LPs and CDs and T-shirts and USB sticks with everything I've ever recorded on them and nonsense like that. So just see me after the show. Thanks again. You guys are wonderful. Mwah. Mwah.